22 million black victims of Americanism are waking up, and they're gaining a new political consciousness, becoming politically mature. And as they develop this political maturity, they're able to see the recent trends in these political elections. They see that the whites are so evenly divided that every time they vote, the race is so close, they have to go back and count the votes all over again. And which means that any block, any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who go to the White House and who stay in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You can keep Johnson in Washington, D.C., or you can send him back to his Texas cotton patch. You're the one who sent Kennedy to Washington. You're the one who put the present Democratic administration in Washington, D.C. The whites were evenly divided. It was the fact that you threw 80% of your votes behind the Democrats that put the Democrats in the White House. When you see this, you can see that the Negro vote is the key factor. And despite the fact that you are in a position to be the determining factor, what do you get out of it? The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. They've been down there 4 years. And all other legislation they wanted to bring up, they brought it up and gotten it out of the way, and now they bring up you. And now they bring up you. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chump. A political chump. In Washington, D.C., in the House of Representatives, there are 257 who are Democrats. Only 177 are Republicans. In the Senate, there are 67 Democrats. Only 33 are Republicans. The party that you back controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and still they can't keep their promise to you, because you're a chump. Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race. What kind of alibi do they come up with? They try and pass the buck. Now back during the days when you were blind, deaf, and dumb, ignorant, politically immature, naturally you went along with that. But today, as your eyes come open and you develop political maturity, you're able to see and think for yourself. Today are in the hands of a government of segregationists, racists, white supremacists, who belong to the Democratic Party but disguise themselves they'll lynch you in Texas as quick as they'll lynch you in Mississippi. Only in Texas, they lynch you with a Texas accent. In Mississippi, they lynch you with a Mississippi accent. And the first thing the cracker does when he comes in power, he takes all the Negro leaders and invites them for coffee to show that he's all right. And those Uncle Toms can't pass up the coffee. They come away from the coffee table telling you and me that this man is all right. Political content. You know how it goes. One of them comes to you and make believe he's for you. And he's in cahoots with the other one that's not for you. Why? Because neither one of them is for you. But they got to make you go with one of them or the other. So this is a con game. And this is what they've been doing with you and me all these years.
tell you why you're here. You feel it. Let me tell you why you're here.
Kitchen, 16 made in the kitchen, 16 made in the kitchen, 16 kitchen. 16 maids in the kitchen.
Down the road, I'm still doing it, you know, and then I'll have another 10 years down the road, you know. I have confidence, and I know that what I'm doing it from the heart, so it means something, you know. I'm not doing it to be a pop star.
like the Beatles. You know, biting your nails and screaming. It's a lot of fun. Started hanging out some more. There were more people. Parties in Brooklyn, parties in the Bronx, parties in Queens, parties in Manhattan. You name it, we were there. Around August, well, let's say July, the real big buzz was the summer of soul that was happening at Mount Morris Park in Harlem. I mean, everybody was talking about it. It was a free concert, and they had a lineup that was unbelievable. So, me and my crew really wanted to be in the in crowd, so we attended the festival, and it was unbelievable. Just to see people dancing on canes, wheelchairs, walkers, bicycles, tricycles, you name it, kids, grown-ups. It was amazing.
Open enough to be able to accept situations, to be able to experience situations as they are and turn them into medicine, turn poison into medicine. Take whatever situation you have and make something constructive happen with it.